third segment of an oral history of Central States Communication Association. 3 years ago, the Past Officers Association, recognizing the importance of documenting a history in an oral history fashion, put together the first of 3 panels to talk about the legacy. What is it that Central States Communication Association has meant to our members? What are the things we can learn from the past to document for the future? Past participants in the first 2 of these segments included Paul Boase, Ken Andersen, Linkugel, Gus Friedrich, Dennis Gouran, Bruce Gronbeck, and David Zarefsky. Some of those people are joining us in the audience today, and perhaps at the end of this segment will want to offer additional comments. Joining us today, we have a very important departure from our last panels. Those who have seen the first 2 tapes will notice that there were no women featured in those first tapes, and that was with good reason. Historically, this particular organization has been founded on strong male roots. We today are very fortunate to share with you an evolution that's taken place in our association. Joining us today, representing a different type of leadership for the organization, are Cynthia Berman-Fink, who was president of the association from 2000-2001, Ellen Reed Gold, who was the president 1994-1995, Judith Pearson, president 1989-1990, Carolyn Calloway Thomas, president 1995-96, and actually Judy Trent, who has been our moderator for the first 2 of these segments and will continue to do that today, was one of the earlier women presidents. Judy served as president 1981-1982, and I was president 1983-84. So we have a variety of perspectives that we're going to be offering today. The main part of the program, however, is very important in terms of the relationship of the conference theme. The conference theme this year, our 70th annual conference, is Our Story, Our Legacy. And we've heard a lot of different stories at this conference. We've heard stories that are very formal. We've heard stories about research. We've heard stories about data collection. We've heard stories about graduate students who are panicked to get their dissertations done before faculty members go off to other institutions. Some of those stories we've heard at other conventions as well. It's not the story itself that is as much importance as what the story is about in terms of context. Words have intrinsic value only if they are put in a context. And what we're going to be sharing today is the context that allows the stories that we've heard here, the stories that we've heard at each of these women's conventions, to pose a picture of the past so that we might better be able to prophesy what the future holds. At the end of our presentation today, we are going to be inviting members of the audience who would like to add to this documentary to do so. And we're also going to be showing the first 2 films that were started 2 years ago and then last year. So those of you who might have missed those documentaries would have an opportunity to see them. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Trent.
Thank you, Linda. This has been a very interesting project, and as you will see from the tapes from the first 2 years, we've really had a good time. And so I think that today we will be able to say that, again, we're going to have a pretty good time. As Linda said, for years there had not been leadership in terms of women officers in this association. And then it did change. I mean, obviously, as you can see, there were a number of women, and a number of women who are not on this panel who have also served as Central States officers. And what we've done each year is to ask these questions, and we've had some really interesting responses, and I think that will be true this afternoon as well. The first question is, what has been and what is the role, in your mind, of Central States in the communication discipline? I mean, is it, does it have any uniqueness from any of the other regional associations or from the national association or international associations? How is it unique, or isn't it? And I think we'll start with Professor Pearson to answer this first question.
When I was reflecting on the entire panel and what we were going to do today, I was reminded of the boomerang theory, which says you can only travel so far before you return to face yourself. And I was thinking about the fact that Central States seems to hold, the region of Central States seems to hold a fondness for people who have grown up here, who have been born here, such that we sometimes move away even for decades, but then come back again. And I think the association reflects that as well, that it is a place that people feel at home, that it's a place where you feel welcome, even if you haven't been there for a long time. The past officers' meetings that we have really create a sense of community that perhaps is unique in some of the other associations. I think in addition to that, Central States, for me at least, because of its physical locale, is center to a lot of the things that happen in the discipline. And when you look at leadership in NCA and other organizations, it's amazing how many people have come from the Central States region originally.
Yeah. Carolyn Callaway Thomas.
Chinua Achebe, the Nigerian writer, says the storyteller creates the stories that others must have. Otherwise, their surviving would have no meaning. And I think one of the things that members of the Central States Association have done quite beautifully is become creators and generators of ideas and knowledge. And I also think that when one thinks of the people in Central States Communication Association, and one can think of a lot of splendid ideas that have been generated. And I just have a list of some of the individuals, some of whom are in this audience today, who have contributed mightily to ideas. David Zarefsky, Judith Trent, Gustav in the area of presidential rhetoric, and I think of Professor Bitzer at the University of Wisconsin, who contributed the idea of the rhetorical situation, Pam Cooper, Gus Friedrich, Kathleen Galvin, other individuals in the area of pedagogy, Dennis Gouran in the area of small group communication. So I see Central States as sort of a nexus of ideas, and that these ideas are then farmed out to people in the West, to people in the North, to people in the East, and even nationwide. And I also, Judith, was amazed by the number of individuals in Central States who've gone on to become president of the National Association Convention. So I think that speaks compellingly to the nature of the business that we do here and this communication association.
Cynthia Berryman Fink is the most, has been president most recently, and maybe your perspective is a little different given of the time.
Well, when I think of the role of Central States in the discipline, I think the role is slightly different based on whether you're a newcomer to the discipline or, dare I say, an old-timer, and I guess I fit in that category now. I think for the new scholars, you know, the graduate students, the people just beginning their career, Central has always offered sort of a gentle socialization into participation in professional associations. For many, it's their first conference. It certainly was for me. And it is a very welcoming place. I use that word gentle purposely. It's a good introduction to belonging to a professional association and being part of academia. And now that we have sort of institutionalized the undergraduate mini-conference, I think we're bringing the undergrads in a gentle socializing kind of way. For the longer-term folks, the established scholars, teachers, I keep hearing the term, and Judy, you used it, coming home. It feels like coming home. It's a place where we feel friendship and colleagueship and comfortable and fondness, a great deal of affection and fondness. Many of us go back many, many years together, and it's a place for sharing our intellectual ideas, for sharing information of our families and our children, and it's just a good place to be.
Thank you, Cindy. Ellen Reed Gold, how do you respond to this question?
I've always thought that Central was to the discipline the way Bush is to the Democrats. The Democrats like to criticize Bush, but they wish they were in his position. We hear some criticism of Central, but I think that as the largest organization, we do play a defining role in the discipline. If you think historically, you realize that the eastern states were slow to accept communication as a discipline. And of course, the western states for many years were sparsely populated, and so this particular area was the heart of what then was called speech and now is called communication studies. One of the things I've noticed about Southern is that they have a rather different orientation to the discipline than we do because of their long fight against segregation and their interest in freedom of speech. One of the things which I think has been exceptionally useful for both Central and Southern is to combine the conventions. I think when we go with Southern, we both come from enough different traditions so that it's insightful, and we have both learned something from each other.
Linda, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would. In thinking about this, the first thing that came to my mind is something that's been mentioned by other members of the panel, and that's that many of our graduate students really do get a start in Central. And in preparing, going back through a lot of files, I came across a letter that I received when I was the president, and it was in response to a survey that we did that year about what are the needs of the organization as viewed by the members. And the letter starts out that this letter speaks for about 6 graduates of prestigious PhD programs in the Midwest. Most of us were born and raised here, and we want to stay here. And then the respondent goes on to talk about the value that Central has to these people. And so I think it's not just the panel here that's feeling that. We definitely, I think, have been the birthplace for many graduate programs, and certainly the standard for many of our graduate students getting them into a profession. I think it's a significant contribution.
All right, thank you. I think we should go on to another question. And Carolyn, why don't we begin with you? The question is this. During the years of your leadership in Central States, how would you describe the membership, the convention programs, attendance, journals? I mean, what was really happening in those years that were just so important in regard to your presidency?
Well, I would say that last year when you invited me to, no, you told me.
Hard for me to believe.
That I would appear on this program this year featuring past officers and their contributions to CSCA. I, of course, said yes, and thought at the moment that the task would be relatively easy. However, when the time came for me to think about my contributions, I realized that the task was indeed a difficult one, precisely because of the role that attribution plays in human affairs, because rarely are 2 or 3 individuals responsible for the success of an organization. So, I did not wish to be guilty of the sins of omission that some of our current and popular historians have been guilty of. That is Stephen Ambrose and Doris Kearns Goodwin. So I wish to give credit to my predecessors, especially Ellen Gold and especially Linda Moore, because I think they're tributaries to their years as president. One of my proud moments, however, was the convention that was held in 1995 in Indianapolis. And the convention focused on the theme, communicating across cultures. And I think that was one of the first time that we in the Central States Association had chosen culture as a centerpiece for a convention. So I think that was quite important. And at that time, Jack Daniel, Associate Vice Provost at University of Pittsburgh, was the keynote speaker. And in his speech, he said the following. He exhorted CSCA members to move beyond cultural wishful thinking. He argued within America, he said, when I find people having so much trouble communicating cross-culturally, in most instances, it turns out that they don't wish to do so. They don't wish to do so for political, economic, social, and a host of other psychological factors. We went beyond wishful thinking. And we even wished an intercultural gala into existence. The gala was designed, and I see some heads nodding, thank you for having been there. The gala was designed to shed a critical light on cultures and by extension, fuse CSCA with more diversity. As you know, CSCA is probably the least diverse organization. And I think that is because of the geographical area that we find ourselves in. In any case, we dramatize the need for continuing conversation on diversity, and we invited ballet fiesta, the Minyo Japanese dancers, and I think the average age of those women was about 17 years. We invited the Ukrainian Banderist choral group from Michigan, the 500 Gouran pipers, and drums of West Africa. All those people participated in the intercultural gala. It was really a wonderful moment. And I think from that moment that we became a little more conscious of intercultural communication. I will not say that I am primarily responsible for that totally, because we know that the intercultural communication interest group has really worked quite beautifully to infuse diversity into the association. During my watch, we also identified some structural problems that go to the heart of how we in CSCA conduct business, including the issue of precisely when the vice president was elected. We noticed with growing scrutiny, for example, that because of the bylaws, the new administration began its term without a vice president. And that new vice president often did not join the executive committee until November, following the fall election. And we also noticed that the vice president only attended 2 meetings of the executive committee, one in November and one in April, and then assumed responsibility for planning the annual conference without time to recruit new members. So, to remedy this situation, during my tenure, we proposed an amendment to the bylaws to alter the election sequence such that the vice president assumes office during the April meeting. And in giving credit to Dan Milloy, that was enacted during his administration. The executive committee during my term also voted to give the interpersonal and small group disciplinary areas interest group status, and so that was a proud moment for us. In addition, I think all of us here contributed to the perennial issue of what to do with the Communication Studies Journal. And during my time, with the help of Kevin Barge as editor of the journal, we worked assiduously to help correct the situation. By the time that I left office, all 1995 and 1996 issues of the journal were scheduled to be in print. And this was achieved through the presentation of some special issues. In addition to that, one of the most important things that we did was to discover that we were filing under the wrong governmental code for our status as a tax-exempt organization. And we also discovered that we had not paid Social Security for a person who had been hired to do some work for the association. So it took us about 2 years in a very delicate way to ensure that we were following the regulations that governed tax-exempt status organizations. So I'm pretty proud that we caught that in time, not to do damage to the association. So I'll stop at that point.
Cindy.
Well, since my presidency was just a year ago, I'm not recollecting historical facts. I think I'm more or less describing the status quo. The issue that hit me as I joined the executive board as vice president was first and foremost a financial issue. The continued recovery of our financial difficulties from the mid-'80s were still presenting themselves by the late '90s. My very first meeting on the executive committee, I remember the board, and I was merely observing at this point, I remember the board spending 20 minutes discussing a $20 expenditure. Now, we're not still doing that, but we're discussing $50 expenditure. But I would say that even now, fiscal conservatism, careful watching over expenditures is still very much the case. We know that our CSCA Past officers are still donating to a large extent to help our financial reserves. The program planner for a given year is still fundraising from their local institution, from book publishers, from the state association, to get revenues to do basic conference activities. And this is something that the executive committee is now discussing. Do we still need to be quite as fiscally conservative? Can we expand our horizon a little bit more? I mean, obviously we need to be fiscally careful, but can we run our convention in a more professional manner financially? Membership and conference attendance you mentioned as an issue. The Cincinnati conference, in which I was president, had 585 registrants. And I was looking back through records. That's not unlike 2 decades earlier. The 1981 conference had 515 registrants. So I guess our conference size has stayed fairly the same over a 20-year period. During my term on the board, we've not been discussing so much how many people attend the conference as much as who attends the conference. There's been a lot of discussion, formally and informally, about graduate students and junior faculty seem to be playing a larger role in Central, and that the senior scholars and folks from the Big Ten universities and well-established researchers may not be attending to the extent that they used to. And I'm hearing different kinds of reactions to this. Some folks are saying that the quality of programming and networking at Central is suffering as a result. Others believe that Central is changing and evolving to become a different kind of organization for perhaps a different audience, and that organizational change is natural and appropriate. As far as programming, one thing I've noticed in the short amount of time that I've been involved in the leadership of the organization is that we seem to be becoming more and more specialized in our interest groups over time, with more and more people attending the programming just for 1 or 2 interest groups of which they are involved. I think Samuel Becker at one of our recent conferences described this as a splintering effect, with fewer of us having a common conference experience, and maybe we're even losing a bit of a common language for discussing issues in our field as become more and more specialized. Just to give a little facts here for the historical record, in 1993 we had 15 different interest groups at Central, and in 2001 we had 20. And I don't know if there's a move to add more, but at that rate we would probably continue adding interest groups. I do applaud Kevin Barge and Pam Cooper's recent work to have convention-wide experiences like the open space or some of these other projects that get all of us or many of us together, at least for a short period of time at the conference. I'm excited about the special projects that came under my leadership, most importantly this one, the Oral History Project. Linda and Judy and I talked about the sometimes difficult continuity problems that occur from one group of leaders, one executive committee to the next. Decisions would get made, policies would get formed, and somehow they fall into a black hole with us reinventing the wheel. So we thought it very important that we work on preserving our history, celebrating our legacy, and making sure that there's greater continuity. Folks may not know that we're moving toward an archival project at the University of Utah Library, where Central probably very shortly will move its archives there so that we will have our archives cataloged and available in the same place that the other regional associations do and that NCA does. So overall, I think we're a vital organization. We have some challenges in front of us, but I'm delighted to
be part of it.
Great. And Alan, tell us about how you saw things in the year that you were president.
Of course, claiming credit for things that happened during my leadership years is like the president claiming credit for the good economy and looking the other direction when the economy tanks. There are three things I want to talk about in terms of my leadership. The first of them is the founding of the Women's Caucus with Judy Trent. But I really think that goes under one of our later questions, the most rewarding aspects of service, and so I'll do that when she and I can coordinate our reminiscences. The second thing I want to talk about is my first term on the board, which started in 1987. And I'm not going to talk about that very much because that's really an area which belongs to Linda, but I want to tell you how this looked to a person who was on the board for her very first year. When I joined the board, David was leaving as president and Barbara Wood was coming in, and there was tremendous concern about the embezzlement problem. And it appeared, and of course, because
financial difficulty.
the financial correct that.
Let's not name names.
Well, that's an interesting emendation because one of the things about this was that everybody on the board had discussed it previously except me. And so I'm listening to all this conversation and trying to figure out just exactly what happened. Of course, the E word was not being used at that time because no convictions had been secured. So there, after a while, I realized that Central States is missing a considerable amount of money, and it appears that someone in the association has made off with this amount of money. And the president, Barbara, would report for what seemed like hour after hour after hour about the sorts of problems she had had trying to be in contact with the Iowa authorities and trying to run down the books and look at the books and find out exactly what had gone on. And I remember just being tremendously relieved that I was not the president of Central States. My life looking at accounting books. And of course, the other thing I remember is that after we got this situation a little bit clarified, we had a long discussion about who was going to be the next executive secretary. And the members on the committee would only hear of one person, and that was Linda Moore. And member after member of the executive committee stood up and testified that Linda was very knowledgeable.
I was good with funds.
That she knew all about financial affairs, that she had been partially responsible for previous bookkeeping, that she would be the perfect person to manage it.
The good bookkeeping. I'm taking notes on it.
So I'll let Linda talk more about that when it's her turn. The third thing I want to talk about is the year I was president. And of course, as you know, being president involves planning the program and serving a term as president. We had the convention was scheduled for Oklahoma City when the year I was planning the program. All I heard was negative comments about Oklahoma City and how I did not intend to be there because who would go to Oklahoma City. And I heard a lot of discussion about that, and I sat and racked my brain about what I could do to encourage attendance. And on one of the trips I made to Oklahoma City, in which I met with Arlie, and we talked about the local arrangements, I went over to the Oklahoma State Archives in Oklahoma City, and I read up on some of the early manuscripts about the history of Oklahoma City, and particularly the first constitutional convention and some things like that. So I decided that what I would do would be to do my best to capitalize on the fact that this was one of the final territories. There was a great land rush into Oklahoma. By then I had learned enough Oklahoma history to know that this was a big site for Native Americans to be moved to, and so we ought to have some kind of emphasis on the Native Americans in Oklahoma City. One of the things I arranged was a blanket dance. And this consisted of Native Americans, professional dancers, some of whom were going to a contest later in the year, perform some Native American dances. And they would lay out a big blanket, and at the end of the performance, everybody was supposed to come up and drop $1 or $2 onto the blanket to help pay for this performance. I had forgotten how poor we were. And at the end of the performance, they counted up all the money, which was mostly in ones, and it turns out there wasn't quite enough money to satisfy the Indians. And so we forked over a little money to help fatten the purse for the blanket dance. Now, another thing which I innovated, although it's actually building on something Judy Pearson started a few years earlier. Judy had a sock hop late at night. We were in a St. Louis, Kansas City area convention. And I was very intrigued with the notion of having something at night for people to do, because many, many times I was at the convention by myself. I didn't really want to go to a restaurant by myself, and sometimes my friends had already made other plans. So I was very, very aware of the problems which a single woman at the convention might run into. And I need to add parenthetically that I didn't have any friends in graduate school. This is
I'll ask you where you went to graduate.
We won't ask. Of the group I went to graduate school with, nobody ever attended a convention. In all the years I've been going to conventions, not a single person with whom I went to graduate school ever came to a convention. Now, I was only there 1 year. I was only at Illinois 1 year. So, you know, many people come and they run around with their graduate school friends, but I didn't have any friends from graduate school. So there were some years in which I thought very much about single women. So I decided at Oklahoma to have a line dance, because line dancing is someone you can do without a partner. And we did, in fact, have a wonderful, wonderful time. And it went on late in the evening. Gus recommended a line dance caller who was just turned out to be wonderful, and so we had a good time. However, because Oklahoma City had a very small attendance, because we had an expensive blanket dance, we had an expensive blanket dance, this was not one of our more profitable. I want to talk a little bit about being on the board. We had some of the perennial problems: money and membership. In these years, people were feeling poor, and so we were trying desperately to keep membership dues down. But we, of course, needed to raise money. So we'd have long, long discussions about not $20, but a $5 raise in the membership dues. The journal was incredibly behind schedule in these years. And Randy Hirakawa, who is the journal editor, would talk to us about how libraries were refusing to pay their subscriptions because they had paid for last year, but they didn't even have the year before. And of course, given our financial situation, this was something which we really did not want to see happen. And libraries, being financial conservatives, would then cancel their subscription to the Central States Journal. And as you know, libraries were under a lot of siege during those years, and we were afraid we would never get our library subscriptions back. So we even had long, long discussions about how to solve the problem of the journal being continuously behind. And I have to say that it turned out that what we really needed was an editor who could receive an imperfect manuscript and just say yes. And when we started adopting that modus vivendi, then we began to catch up with some of our papers. Another long-term project which we undertook during my presidential years was to try to get away from formal delivery of papers and into a more discussion-type format. And I must say, this has been just exactly like banging your head against a brick wall. We are still wedded to the mode of formal delivery of papers. And every so often, the program planner will take the pledge to have more informal programs, but we've only been intermittently successful in executing that kind of plan. Another project which we worked on was procedures for new members of the association. And we worked on that when I was president-elect, president, and also as past president. One of the interesting things which came up during the years I was on the board, was that the interest groups decided they would like to award prizes to the best paper. And people on the board were very uneasy about these revolutionary and radical tactics by the interest groups, which they felt might rapidly get out of hand until the interest groups would be establishing their own independent territorial rules. And so I agreed that if Arlie would send me all the newsletters of the interest groups, which he had received from the interest groups to forward to members of the interest groups, I would read the letters very carefully to determine if any of our enterprising interest groups had established an award for a paper, and especially if it were a monetary award, that we would really like the board to know about. I don't know that anything ever came of that. I think the interest groups and the board finally got together and agreed on procedures for that. I think that's all I'm going to say about my leadership on the board, and let Linda talk.
Linda.
Thank you. Well, I was very glad that Ellen had given a lot of analysis to that Oklahoma convention, because that was the year I was president. And because of Ellen's dedication to wanting things to be fun, I actually bought my first pair of cowboy boots, which I wore to the dance that we had, the line dance, and I've enjoyed those, so thank you. I want to talk about three different areas. The first area I want to talk about is when I served as executive secretary between the years of 1988 and 91. And I only want to talk about that briefly because I know that Judy Pearson was present in one of those years, and I'm sure she's going to be talking about, from her perspective, what happened during that time. But I did want to, for historical reasons, I want to document some things that did occur. January the 1st, 1989, we actually adopted the name Central States Communication Association. And this is very important for us to remember. That same year, we actually adopted the name Communication Studies for our journal, which was, again, a very important change for us. And those two actions came about as a result of polling the membership. And as I went back and looked through the files, I discovered we've polled the membership a lot. And the decisions that we've made have been reflective of what we have found from the membership. I recall that we polled the membership, I think it was under Larry Miller's presidency, about interest groups. Do we have the right kinds? And what are they reflecting what the needs of the organization are? And I was interested, Cindy, that you mentioned the growth of interest groups. I do want to point out one other thing, that during the years I served as executive secretary, we made our final payment to SCA, SCA that had helped us out during those difficult financial times. We paid the money back. And that was a real turning point, I think, for the association. And I want to kind of shift from that into the other critical part for all of us sitting up here, and that's the convention that we planned. Because we had paid that debt back and we're slowly coming back financially, we were able to start thinking in more universal terms, not thinking about $5 and $10. Although I am glad, Cindy, that people are still talking, because I know, and I think we should document for the records, that we currently have assets of $180,000. So we are not hurting as an association now. But I am glad they're still paying attention, because I think it's important to. But because we were starting to come back financially, we were able to do some things that we hadn't been able to do in previous years. The year that I helped plan the convention was one that we had with Southern, a joint conference with Southern. And I have to tell you that anybody who has to go through the planning process, you panic. I was so blessed because my co-planner for Southern was Navita James. And Navita and I really didn't know each other before we started this process, and we got to know each other electronically. And it's developed into a wonderful friendship that we still have today, and we owe it all to that joint planning. But we decided a couple of things. That we decided, first of all, we could do whatever we wanted because nobody was going to fire us. So we decided that we were going to, the convention theme that year, which was held, by the way, April 14th through 18th, 1993 in Lexington, Kentucky. The convention theme was Communication and Social Change, Building Unity and Respecting Diversity, because we decided that it was about time we started calling attention to critical issues that involved us outside of our strict discipline lines. We decided also that we were going to change some things in terms of conference presentation. We thought that there were certain dialogues that were critical enough that we wanted everybody to come to them, and so we were not going to schedule anything opposing those particular dialogues. We called them spotlight dialogues. So we had a number of invited guests who would talk about, strangely enough, the convention theme. Now, this worked only to some extent. I mean, to our disappointment, instead of everybody coming to these, some people decided this was the time they were going to have breakfast or have coffee, or but still, we felt that we were being true to what we had intended. The keynoter that year was Reginald Wilson, who was in charge of the Minority Affairs Division of the American Council on Education. And we were very pleased to have him there because Reggie has given a lot of attention to the very concern that we wanted to bring to people's attention. The conference attendance that year was 960, but only 460 were Central States. 500 were identified as Southern. And so it was a little bit off of what we had. In fact, in 1992, the Central States Conference attendance was 568, so it was a little bit off in terms of Central members. At that conference, though, we reinstituted the graduate student breakfast, and we expanded it. The graduate student breakfast had been offered on and off for a number of years, sponsored by the past officers. We decided that we were going to expand it that year, and we not only had the graduate student breakfast sponsored by the past officers, but we actually had 2 full-length programs that past officers participated in. The first one, which occurred right after the breakfast, was Communication and Gender, and some people who are in this room were on that panel. Gus and Judy Pearson, Judy Trent, and Charlie Stewart were on that panel. And then followed after that was a program that the past officers presented called Communication in the Year 2010. Dennis Gouran was on that, Donovan Oakes, Ernie Borman, David Zarefsky, and Melissa Beal. So we actually had a whole half day with graduate students, and I think that's an important thing for us to document historically. And again, it was partly because we were fiscally a little bit better, and we could do things like that. At that particular conference, we had over 220 programs, so it was a joint and a very full conference. Shifting over to the third part, which is the presidency, I had forgotten so many of these things, and I went back and looked at minutes from meetings. And again, I think I know it's because the organization was rebounding fiscally because we were sound. Even though the journals were not on track yet, the coffers were significant enough that we could go back to doing some things that had been particularly important to us. And one of these things that was reinstituted after an 11-year absence was the Federation Prize. The Federation Prize was instituted in the early 1980s. Judy, did you actually start
78.
that?
I think Bruce did.
Bruce, thank you. But we had suspended the prize, which was a prize to stimulate research among our scholars. We had suspended it when we didn't have enough money to pay the scholars. So we were fiscally sound enough to reintroduce that Federation Prize for the 1994 conference, the announcement of that in 1994, and in fact, Judy Trent headed up that particular endeavor. We also initiated the Graduate Student Teaching Award that year as a result of a recommendation that came from what previously had been called the Outstanding Young Teacher Committee, and that year we changed the name of that committee to the Outstanding New Teacher Award Committee. But that particular organization group had recommended that we honor graduate student teaching, and so we were able to institute that in 1994 as well. We also held a pre-conference seminar on cultural diversity, which was in many ways a bridge. It was a bridge from the conference theme the previous year, and certainly build on some of the things that Ellen wanted to include in her conference, and then Carolyn built on a little bit later. So we were able to pull all these things together, I know, because we did have a sound financial base. In 1994, we had 836 members, 39 departmental members, and 476 library subscriptions. And so that all adds up to some healthy income. The libraries, as was mentioned before, we had difficulty with that over the years. I'm so glad, and I think it's important to document in this state that our journals are now on schedule. And that means a tremendous amount for the future of the organization to have that. So that's a lot of facts and figures, but I think it does kind of give us a point to think about what's happened in the 90s and it's been reflected here.
I just want to add a couple of things because it goes back to the times before there were problems, financial problems in Central States. I mean, yeah, when Bruce started the Federation Prize and we're beginning to have more awards like that, and I, with Bruce's help, started the Women's Caucus. I mean, we were doing a lot of pretty dynamic sorts of things at that time because we did believe we did have the money to do them. It was a wealthy, healthy, scholarly organization, certainly as much as or more than many of the other regionals at that time. I remember when I was president, I got such a kick out of this. I remembered, because I had the 50th anniversary convention, I thought that was such a big deal, and I'd done all of these programs. All I could remember, just put these programs all over, my office. And so when Cindy became program planner, I said, I have to find that program because Cindy, I just did all these programs. Well, Cindy found it. I think there were 50 programs or something, or even
smaller.
less.
Yeah.
It was small. But to me it had seemed absolutely enormous undertaking. And the last time, though, that we were, as an association in Milwaukee, I was president, and our keynote speaker was Lee Dreyfus, who was the governor of Wisconsin at the time, and was a Wayne State person originally, Linda, and a colleague, Dan Logan, from Wayne State, got Governor Dreyfus here. He gave an absolutely delightful talk. He arrived just maybe 3 minutes before he was supposed to start speaking, but he was here and did a fine job. So those are my memories of a few of those years in between. Let's kind of change the.
Should I answer that question?
Oh yeah.
You hear about the sock
You
hop.
surely didn't miss
Exactly.
And I love quotations. Carolyn and I talk about our love for quotations all the time, but as I was listening to the various periods of time, I thought about Sir Isaac Newton's comment that the laws of nature delight in transmutations. And I thought, what else could be more appropriate for our discussion of the financial and other situation? I am, because we're not going in chronological order, I am back at that 1988 meeting with Ellen Reed Gold, who was sitting there, and we were looking at each other saying, what have we gotten ourselves into? Good news is you got elected, bad news is there's no money. Good. And then to find out that this mysterious person who we were talking about was my chairperson in my department, and that was an even more difficult situation because I had to live with it day and night, in my day job and my night job. And it was quite ticklish. And then he fired me for a minute, and then I had to get my job back. And it was a very compelling time where all of these associations and relationships reached out in ways that went beyond the association, went to the institution and other places. The other thing that was true at this time is that we've had this wonderful celebration, this 50th anniversary celebration, and I too remember that as a huge birthday party, and I thought it was flamboyant and wonderful, and only it was sad that I couldn't do it.
Gus popped out of the cake.
Yes, and I wanted to do that too. But so we've had this wonderful celebration, and then for a whole variety of reasons, things had just slid. It slid because of the financial piece of it. There was less interest in Central States. The programs maybe were as good as before, but there certainly weren't social events, and there wasn't a spirit of fun, a spirit of excitement, a spirit of this is where you want to be, and this is where you want to be part of a professional association. And so it occurred to me that what I needed to do was I needed to increase membership, because membership had fallen. It wasn't always the same as it appears when we look only a couple points in time. It had actually fallen down. I had to increase the quantity and the quality of the programs, and I had to encourage opportunities for social interaction at the convention and create an excitement again. And so though some of you think I only use glamour and glitter to do this, there was substance to this whole program as well. And there was a lot of glitter, and I know some of you are still talking about vacuuming it up for 2 years. But who would have expected it? Who would have expected it? My convention year was 1989. It was in Kansas City. And I want to tell you that from then until now, Linda Moore has always been my savior and my angel, because we got in trouble right away in Kansas City, or at least I did. And she helped pull me out of that. And then when we were planning this program, and I arrived and I had some general information about what I had done, and people were saying what their convention theme was and how many people had attended, and I said, well, I wasn't going to talk on that level of specificity because I don't remember any of those kinds of things. I have no idea where I was or what the theme was. But Linda Moore pulled out a newsletter where I had written everything about my convention and gave it to me, so now I'm knowledgeable and I'm fine about talking about all of these things. But the reason I say that Linda Moore saved me in Kansas City was that she came up with an idea. When I went for the site visit, we actually arrived at different times, and I arrived very late at night, maybe 11 o'clock or midnight, and there were 3 or 4 of us waiting for a cab, and there was only one cab available. And the cab driver said to us, I'll take all of you, and then you'll just each pay a portion of the fee. You won't have to pay the entire fee. Cabs were unregulated in Kansas City at that point, and so the other 3 people were dropped off first. And then he said to me, you're going to give me $50, or I'm going to take you to an alley someplace and drop you off. And I thought, welcome to Kansas City, my convention. This is going to be a lot of fun. And I was so concerned about that, and so concerned that, you know, as Ellen talked about single women and people who are vulnerable coming into that town the next year and being in an unsafe situation, it was just very disturbing. And so Linda actually managed to do a contract with the Yellow Cab Company, so we would have people ahead of time being able to call and being able to arrange for transportation that was safe and that was at a set price that everybody could live with. And that was a really incredible thing. The association, as Linda said, had a new name. This was the first convention after the new name, a new journal title as well. And we were in a bit of a jam, and so we had to do things to get people to come to the convention and to participate. We had this particular year, 110 programs and over 400 program participants, which was a new high. In the preceding years just before that, we had gone into a real lull. I used the theme Pride in Our Past, Faith in the Future in order to incorporate, you know, virtually anything, as most of our themes too, frankly. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the things that we did have to be proud of, because there was a lot of gnashing of teeth and a lot of criticism and a lot of negative feeling. It seemed to me we needed to buoy up our spirits by talking about the good things that had occurred. And so I asked the past presidents of Central States, interestingly, to reflect on their years as president. And the problem was I never recorded it like you all are doing, and that would have been a wonderful thing if we'd had that, you know, now. But we didn't have it. We didn't have a record of it, but many people in this room agreed to serve on panels talking about Central States in the past. I also, in terms of faith in the future, asked a number of respected scholars who sometimes didn't come to Central States, like Gerald Miller, to come to the convention and talk about his particular research agenda and his research. I asked Lauren Reed to have a coffee hour, and he did, and that was a really big plus. And J. Jeffrey Auer, who was one of my mentors and my advisor for my master's degree, was the keynote speaker at the breakfast. And so many of these old friends came forward and participated. The other thing that I had observed is, because I am in the oldest group of the baby boomers, that there were several people who are my age, and I'm not in this group, but there were several people my age who were becoming incredible scholars at a very, very early time. And I'm thinking about people like Steve Duck and Linda Putnam, for example, and those two folks didn't necessarily come to the Central States Communication Association. So I also arranged to have panels of young scholars, people who were just emerging, prognosticate about the future. Where was the field going? What kind of research did we need to do? What were the communication challenges that we really needed to address? And then I arranged a number of panels, and you can see already that it was not the program planners who were doing all the planning, but I had almost a convention within the convention of these several features. But I had people from other regions, Janice Andersen, Steve Beebe, Judy Burgoon, Michael Burgoon, Michael Hanna, Pat Carney, Jim McCroskey, Tim Plax, Virginia Richmond, and Anita Taylor to come in to do presentations, to give our association a larger venue, a larger kind of audience, and a place to draw from. And they did some wonderful programs for us, and many of you remember Michael Bergouin's speech, The Divorcing Dame, which then was published later on. He was kind enough, Judy Trent was running for NCA president that year, and he was kind enough to say to her, don't sit next to me because I don't want any of this to rub off on you. And it was a very vivid memory, and she moved, and that was good. But it was very interesting, provocative, and quite fun. I also added a day to the program. This was the first time that we started at 1:30 on Thursday and went until 11:30 on Sunday, and I think that's the pattern till now. But I just literally added a day to increase membership, increase the programming possibilities. And what I did on the very first part of it was to arrange a basic course kind of meeting because of my own interest in basic course and the fact that many basic course directors had difficulty going to yet another conference, and so we had basic course activities programmed that first afternoon. We used the Truman Library for 2 programs, and that was really exciting and quite wonderful. A couple of rhetoric programs that were good. We had a debate, and I don't know, Judith, if you remember this debate or not, but you were on one side with Tim Plax, and I think that might be was the beginning of your friendship with them, as a matter of fact, which is continuing to this day very strongly. But Tim Plax and Judy Trent were on one side, and Patricia Carney, Plax's wife, of course, and Jimmy Trent were on the other side, and the debate topic was, should married couples serve in the same departments? And yes, the other side, I think they all did. We also added a number of social events, and I was blessed too with good local arrangements. People, Diana Prentice and Meredith Moore were local arrangements, and they helped an awful lot. We had low and high impact aerobics every morning. We had an inexpensive convention breakfast buffet with J. Jeffrey Auer serving as the keynote speaker. We got menus from a place downtown because we were in somewhat of an isolated area, so we got restaurant menus and brought them to the hotel, and then had buses to take people down to those restaurants and the pub area and shopping and everything. And I took a little bit of heat about the shopping piece of it, but it's all right, it doesn't matter. We're going to have cooking school in New Orleans, so it's going to get better. And we did other things. We had complimentary continental breakfast from the publishers. We talked to the publishers. Yeah, but the best thing of all was the sock hop, I think. And I think Linda thought, what am I doing dealing with this woman?
I have to say that Judy was the first president that I had to deal with in terms of when I came in as executive secretary. I'm thinking fiscally, and you hear what she's got in mind.
Right. That's right. Yeah, and she'd say, now let's talk a little bit about this, and maybe we can do this. I don't have to spend money on it. But we had a contest at the sock hop, and we had people wearing poodle skirts and white suede shoes and dancing all night long, and it was just wonderful. It was just absolutely delightful. So they were years of glamour and glitter. But they were also years, I think, of substance and style, and they helped in a number of ways get us back on the path that we needed to go on. I was in a session this morning and saw a young person, very, very bright young person, but young, said, Eastern was in financial trouble, but now they're out of it, as though they didn't recognize that Central States had ever had any financial trouble. So I think it's okay for us to talk about both the ill and the good of what has happened. So, thank you.
Well, let's change direction here a little bit. And instead of talking about our conventions and the things that actually happened when we were on the executive committee, but talking about Central States itself in that time, what were the real strengths of Central States? Good years or bad years, there were some very solid accomplishments of this association. What were some of them in a time that you remember when you were on the executive committee? And what were any possible weaknesses in addition to, we know the financial concerns, and we know that the journal was a problem for years, but what else? What were the real strengths of this association that's made us perhaps get to this time? I want to start with you, Ellen, or you can just start down and then come back this way.
Well, what I've always thought was the greatest strength of this association is its flexibility and its willingness to make room for new interest groups. There certainly is a downside to that, inasmuch as we fragment our interest and diffuse our membership. But it seems to me that the communication discipline is one which has always been open to new methods of study, and of course the internet and electronic communication is the best example at this minute. But for example, we established the Women's Studies group without too much ado, and it was rapidly followed by some other interest groups. Some of these interest groups were based upon models from other associations, and some of them began with Central States. And I've always thought that was an enormous piece of flexibility for Central.
Thank you. Linda?
I think one of the strengths of the association from the time that I first started coming, which was in 1966, I interviewed for my first job at Central. At that time, we used to have, the rooms where people would go and interview, and the placement service. The people, it's a wonderful place to be introduced to the discipline. It's a place to find support. It's a place to try new ideas, and it's a place that's very accepting. And I think that even though we have talked about some of the difficulties of the association, I think it's the fact that there have been people dedicated to what they have gotten from the association, giving it back, that sustains it. And I think that's remarkable. I think that is unique in this particular region.
Carolyn, Cindy?
I would just like to sort of echo what Ellen has said, although she didn't read my notes, but we had virtually the same thing in terms of the response to this question, and that is, I think, a great strength of the association is its capacity for flexibility. And I would also add resilience, because when you think of all the things that you have talked about, that we have talked about around this table, it seems to me that it has to be resilience as well.
A strength I've appreciated is the attention to both scholarship and pedagogy. I think the Federation Prize is equally as prestigious as the Outstanding Young New Teacher Award. If you look at the program this year, you see a pretty good balance between research-oriented programs and pedagogical programs.
I would say forgiveness. and I would say forgiveness because many of us came here to do our first convention papers or our first something else, and because we are flawed people and because we are incomplete and we don't know all of the answers, we make errors. And I think it's been amazing how we have forgiven each other over and over again. One brief example, my first convention paper was done at Central States, and it was a critique of Jerry Miller and Ed Black's work. And I had a long, thoughtful, philosophical piece about, because of the argument between social science and humanism at that time, and I suggested that these two men, ought to get together and figure out, something like rape, rapprochement, or something else, and they were both in the audience, and they both became good friends as a result of that meeting. And it was just amazing. And I think about that now, and I could hardly sleep at night. I would never do that. But
That's funny because, when Gus was president, he put together a program that is similar to the one you're speaking, where you ask, Gus asked Miller to defend rhetorical work. And it was Ed Black, wasn't it? Who was the other?
No, I think Bruce was on it. I don't remember who was all on it.
But it was really interesting. And the thing that I've always felt about Central States is that it was the heart of the discipline for so many years, and therefore the intellectual strength of the discipline. And I assume that there are probably still more doctoral students in the schools in this region in our discipline than in others, and that's a big contribution. I mean, a lot of the real heavyweights in our discipline, went through Central States, were part of this association.
One of the things that struck me, because I didn't come into the field until 1976, I guess, shortly after I came in, Jesse Delia wrote an article in which he talked about the fact that we never published any books. And maybe some of you remember the date of that particular article. All we did was write articles. And Jesse, who never flinched, compared us with other disciplines who had books and books and books and books. And I read this article and I was a little unhappy, although it did in fact seem to me to be accurate. And almost immediately afterwards, we began to publish books and books and books. And it struck me that these years, let's assume it's the early 80s, these years suddenly saw communication studies grow into a mature discipline. And we were there at this turning, and it was a little hard to observe because we were in the middle of it. But we suddenly became a grown-up discipline. Other fields, other departments now use textbooks written by communication studies people. That would not have happened when I was first in the discipline.
I think also if we're talking about strengths, we ought to celebrate the enormous commitment and loyalty of many members of this organization who, when we were financially strapped, took money out of their own pockets to salvage this organization. And then when I see the amount of work that people do, volunteer, we're a total volunteer organization. We have no paid staff. And the enormous amount of loyalty and commitment and dedication to this organization is really heartwarming.
It is, and I can't really speak for the other regionals. I go to one of the other regionals all the time, but I don't know if they are as cohesive and as much of a real group as Central, but if they are, it speaks very well for our discipline across the country. Let's change just a little bit here again and talk about what you think have been the benefits for you from having an opportunity to be a leader in Central States. I don't know where you want to begin, but what linkages that you've made, or however. Cindy, you had the last comment. Let's start with you.
Well, you know, in watching the tape of this session the last 2 years, the answer always seems to be friendships, and I have to echo that also. I have developed friendships with people that I would not have done so were it not for serving the organization. The other thing for me is it feels very good to give back to an organization that so nurtured me early in my career. I mean, it was here that I presented my first papers. It was here that I got the Outstanding Young Teacher Award. Folks at this table have written letters for my promotion and tenure file. And it feels good after being developed and nurtured by an organization to serve it and to give back.
Good response. Linda?
I was starting to think about getting back to the theme of what this conference is about, stories. And I think that many members of this organization have personal stories that Cindy was talking about, their relationship to the organization. And I think actually that's one of the challenges that we have right now is to help people remember why Central is important to them and to get them involved so that 40 years from now somebody can have the same kind of opportunities that we have had through the association. I just wanted to add one thing that I think is extremely important also, and that's networking. You know, not just friendships, but a number of times I've been able to call colleagues that I've met through Central and trust their judgment and ask about when we're hiring a faculty member, you know, I need to know what's the strength of this individual. The letters can say one thing, but the reality may be something else. And having that kind of professional network, I think, is very important for me.
Carolyn?
Well, I think to observe some of the wonderful spirits of human cooperation and goodwill that I have felt in the association, because I think I and others have worked against the perennial question, why would you or any African American want to be a member of the Central States Communication Association? Because sometimes I think when people look at ethnicity, they don't always go backstage to find out some loveliness that is behind the ethnicity. And so I think that one of the roles that I have played in the association has been to act as an agent, an ambassador of goodwill, to let people know that there are some really wonderful people in Central States Communication Association and that they are willing to be open and affirming and inviting and just lovely in their spirit of goodwill. So I think that would be one of the things that I'd love to just put on the table.
Thank you.
I'm a first-generation college student, and my mother went to the 8th grade, and this has been the most amazing ride I can imagine, and a lot of it has to do with the association. And I think one of the reasons that I love bringing graduate students to this convention and to NCA and other things is because I know I can recall that experience. And so that whole sense of possibilities of growth, of finding people who think about ideas the way you do, who have the same interest areas, it's just quite overwhelming to find that and to find a place where, you know, those ideas are safe and respected and encouraged. So I would say that those were the pieces to it that made a big difference, especially for somebody who is coming to higher education as a new person.
I mean, it seems that each of us has talked about this very personally, about the association very personally. And I remember that too from the first, from the sessions we had the first 2 years. Changing.
May I add my
yeah.
2 cents?
Yes,
It's
ma'am.
hard to keep a good woman down. Although I'd have to put people as number 1. I come here because of the people. Almost as important for me has been the opportunity to talk about political, about women, about campaigns with other people. That is something that never took place in my department until Diana Carlin joined it. There was no one who shared my interest. And yet I would find I would come to breakfast with people at the association, and we'd start out talking about the dance last night, and the next thing you know, we'd be deep into, well, what are you doing? What have you read recently? And because these people are really interested in ideas as well, it was like listening to a lecturette in which people would say, well, have you read this and such? Oh my goodness, no, what does it say? And so I have found the intellectual challenges and comradeship, as Judy says, just incredibly valuable to me. And it's one of those merging of the people whom I really, really love, but I also love them because of their deep intellectual interest.
Do you think that the young faculty who attend Central States today and the graduate students are having these same responses to it that we had, which we all seem to share?
Well, several of my graduate students who in 1 year attended National and attended Central said they felt safer here. It was smaller, it was more personable, you'd see the same people. It wasn't nearly as frightening and as overwhelming an experience. So I think it's still that gentle socialization into the discipline.
I think one can look at the number of graduate students who attend the conference as an example of that. That it's a reinforcing place.
Why don't we talk a little bit about when you were officer, what was the relationship of Central States at that time with the other disciplinary associations, with the National Association, with the other regionals? I mean, does anything come to mind that was particularly good, bad, or whatever? Linda, you're shaking your head.
Well, I was remembering that the other regionals were very understanding when we were having difficulty with our journal publications, because that's a headache. We have journal exchanges with the other regionals, and since we were always behind, for many years we were behind in our journal publication, it posed problems for other regionals, and their bookkeeping got behind and sometimes went across 2 or 3 of their executive secretaries before we were actually able to get a journal out and get the payments. I mean, that was difficult. And I think that's important that the other regions were supportive of us and allowed us a lot of slack during some difficult years. And as did NCA or SCA, helped us out tremendously. And I think that's extremely important for us to remember.
Yeah, and I always had the impression, it was more than impression, not everyone in NCA or SCA really did want to help Central States either. That wasn't there were some people who thought that wasn't a good thing for the National Association to do. So when we were able to pay it back and pretty rapidly, I think that was particularly good.
That was important. Well, think about it. I mean, none of the other regionals had ever come to ask for something like that, and the national office was taking a chance on us. Of course, there were people in this organization who signed a document that said they would be willing to pay out of their pocket if the association did not recover, but the association did recover.
Mm-hmm.
But having the national support us in that way, I think is very, very important for us.
I wanted to mention one person that I was really impressed with when I was on the board the second time, and this is Judith S, who at that time was the chair of the States Advisory Commission. And I went to several meetings, and I was just overwhelmed by the sorts of things that the States Advisory Committee was doing with the state associations under her leadership. And I had not realized until I listened to Judy and the states how important things like teacher credentialing were to the continuation of this discipline. That if we could not make sure that people who were teaching speech in the high schools were properly credentialed, we might not see speech communication continue to be offered in the high schools. And I think Judith must have served 2 terms as the state's advisory chair, and she really did a wonderful job.
Thank you. Anybody else here? Why don't we just talk a little bit about the professional linkages that this has been. And in a sense, Cindy really started that conversation. And does anybody else want to add to that one? I mean, the professional linkages. I mean, certainly one person that I started to write books with, I really met at Central States. I mean, I think we've all had some kinds of associations like that. That the people who've been really important to you intellectually, are they people from this association? Pretty much. Is that where it started, Carolyn?
I think I probably have to say yes, to an extent, although my roots go way back to SCA, and I met a lot of beautiful people in that association as well, who are also members of Central States, but certainly in terms of research, I think I've been helped tremendously by Pam Cooper and other individuals. So I would say that I've been able to make some linkages from a professional perspective.
Linda?
I was trying to think back, as I was reflecting, I've spent so much of my time in Central thinking not about these issues, thinking about other fundamental issues. And
Money issues.
yeah,
Let's be
but
specific.
I gave my first conference paper at Central. Somebody else mentioned they did too, and I think the beginnings are very important for people, and the ability to take a chance and to get your feet firmly planted.
And I think it's important that now, the past officers group is doing this for students now. We're starting our debut program. Started small, but I mean, let's hope that it grows and continues and it is prosper. You know, we've exhausted some of the planned questions, but have we not covered a topic that you would like to talk about?
Well, I'd just like to add something. We were talking, or I guess Ellen said earlier that none of her doctoral or graduate school friends attended conferences. And Carolyn and I went to school together at Indiana University, and we had the most incredible class when we were there. I mean, there were 10 or 12 names that everybody knows, and they were from every area of the discipline. But one of the great gifts that Jeff Auer gave us was this not only this kind of the energy level or the capacity for accepting difference, but also just helping us unofficially. There was no mentor term at that time, but by example and by suggestion, telling us what we ought to be doing, that we ought to be doing papers at Central States as graduate students. We weren't to wait until we were assistant professors to do that. We were to be writing articles. We were to be critiquing ideas. We were to be doing all of those things. And I think, you know, as I was trying to think back about friendships, a lot of our friendships go back to that time, to Patty, Andrews, and all kinds of folks who were there at that time, Rich Enos, and just lots and lots of people. And we continue to see them, even though we're in very different disciplines, in very different areas. We continue to be interested first in our children and then our grandchildren, and it continues on. So it really does have multiple places of intersection.
And I think that illustrates quite beautifully the tension that sometimes exists between the mind and the spirit. You know, we don't quite get those things aligned as properly as we ought to, because there is a segment in the association that believes that you ought to focus on intellectual things. And so I think it ought to be both, and so regulating that can be very problematic. So I think it takes a special kind of leader to bring together those kinds of things. And I think you, Judy, you've done a wonderful job. You're going to go sock hop. I mean, that tradition it really does continue, and there is a cadre of people who attend those dances every single year, and there's an expectation there. So I think we cannot undermine the spirit in all of this, and that we want to celebrate this right.
There's one, we haven't talked about journal editors. I think even in any of the interviews that we've had over the last 3 years, I just want to point out the importance that journal editors have had on some of the things that we've all benefited from. And we ought to be giving awards, I think, to journal editors, because that's the thread, the intellectual thread that really does keep us together beyond just a conference and conventions. And over the years, a lot of people have worked hard to make sure that the quality of the journal is sustained when we have interruptions in it. So I want to make sure that we document that, how important those journal editors have been and continue to be.
Yeah. And our newest feature in terms of the journal is publishing the research of the Federation Prize winners, statements from the Outstanding Teacher Award winners, presidential reflections. I think this allows an outlet for a variety of kinds of publications, as well as helps preserve some of the history and legacy of the association.
And Cindy, would you just take a minute? I know we're about ready to wrap this up, but would you just take a minute to talk about what Mike Allen has been doing in terms of mentoring graduate students and reviewing the answers? I think that's such a wonderful project.
Yes, this is absolutely excellent. Since Mike Allen is editor of the journal, as graduate students, doctoral students submit their work to the journal, he works them through the process of what reviews mean, what you do after you get a revise or resubmit. Can you debate or discuss with a journal editor, disagree with them? And he actually illustrates the process of getting published and mentors them through that process. It's absolutely excellent.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that does belong on this tape.
And we've agreed that that will be a continuing feature of subsequent journal editors.
I'm wondering,
Before you go on, I have another thing I'd
All
like
right.
to say.
right,
I can't, of course, leave out the history of the founding of the Women's Caucus, because when we founded the Women's Caucus in the early 80s, first of all, it's the first leadership project with which I was involved. It was actually Judy's idea, because although I had been the chair of the National Association Women's Caucus, I had no idea how to go about doing this at Central. But I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of things which we did. First of all, the Women's Caucus, considering we were a bunch of non-political, naive women, developed a very strategic approach.
We could contest that.
Well, we like to portray ourselves that way. It's much easier to mold in organizations if you look harmless on the outside. One of the things we did was we got the program planner to put our program at a time when no other interest group was meeting. And the thought that we had here was members of the Women's Caucus came from a variety of disciplinary areas. So we would sit down in the Women's Caucus and we would plan what programs we were going to do. And then we would also think about programs which might fit better under the aegis of other interest groups. And so having thus discussed among ourselves what we were doing, we would then go and insert our ideas as well into the notions of, into the goals of other interest groups. And the other thing I have to say about the Women's Caucus is that this was an extraordinarily radical organization in the minds of many, many members. First of all, they were not sure that such a thing as a gender differentiated group should be formed at all. And I've had a number of women, even within the last 5 years, tell me that they were afraid to join the Women's Caucus because they did not know what their administration at home would think about this. And so although we really have been quite a conventional group in my opinion, we did in fact initiate what seemed to people to be a fairly radical area of studies. On the national level, of course, they've moved into being a women's studies group as well as a caucus. Here in Central, we've kept it as being both women's studies and the caucus with its political goals as in part of the same interest.
You know, Alan, though, when we talk about the caucus, there are a couple of folks here who really were instrumental. I mean, for example, I don't know, Bruce, were you president then? And Gus was on AC, and Bobby was a member of the Women's Caucus, as was Jimmy Trent. There were, you know, a number of men who were very involved in that this happened. I mean, so we had the idea, but they gave us the, that it happened. And I would say that Central's probably never been the same since. Linda, I'm going to turn this over to you.
We'd like to have the members of the audience, some of you participated on these tapes before and some haven't, but if there are things that you'd like to add to this documentary, we'd like to invite you to add them at this point. The only thing I would ask is that you're going to have to come up here so that you can be documented on camera. Bobby, do you want to say anything?
Okay. We were just talking about memorable conventions and times that we've had, and we were sharing that the Martin Luther King assassination convention, many of us were just arriving in Chicago at the time of the unfortunate announcement. And I guess it will always stand out with me as being one of the saddest times of my life in terms of being at that convention, overlooking the fires and hearing the gunshots and the feelings about our country at that particular point in time. It was one of those events that I'll certainly never forget. But it just so happens that several of our meetings have coincided with national issues, and that was one that hit square on our April weekend.
It was in 1968.
1968, that's right.
We should say that was Bobby Patton. I mean, we all know who Bobby is, but anybody else like to share?
Called President.
President. President. Yeah. Anybody else like to? Paul, would you like
The
to?
stories I know of cannot go on tape.
At least on this one, right?
Well, if you are feeling bashful about being in front of the camera, but if you would like to add to the history of the organization, I would invite you to do two things. There's a history timeline that Pam Cooper has put up in the lobby area where the book displays are. If you have any memorable things that you feel comfortable sharing with others, you might want to write on that timeline. And then she's also provided an opportunity for people to be a bit more formal in writing narratives about what their experiences in Central are, and so I would invite you to do that as well. Well, we are concluding our third examination of the history of Central States, and I guess we should conclude it on a very positive note, because Central has been through a lot, but it's very exciting to see the new faces of the new graduate students who come and who are discovering for themselves what we discovered at our first Central meeting. And I think that we've demonstrated through the history that's been provided over the years that there is a very strong foundation for future generations to enjoy the same benefits that we've all experienced. And I want to thank the panel for experiencing those with us today. And I want to thank Judy Trent for being the architect of the questions over the years and keeping the group on track. So thank you all.
And I want to thank Cindy, because this really was Cindy's idea. I mean, as she was planning the convention, it was before you were president, maybe you were second vice president, I don't remember what office should be held, but you know, she really said we need to have some kind of a history like this, and so we three came up with this. But you know, I don't think that many other associations do. You know, in NCA there are all of those tapes in it, but they've never been put together, and people haven't seen them. So I really do hope that these can be edited, and
These this tape 3 series will be available for distribution or purchase at a very nominal fee. And not only do we have the interesting stories of Central over the years, but I think the tapes give a sort of development of the discipline in the field as well. So they could be very useful for graduate student orientation. We hope they do get widely disseminated.
it's been a fun project.
And thanks to Arlie Daniel for being our videographer.